Hello everyone, bringing you a video today looking at some different varieties of what is sort of colloquially referred to as crossover belt trousers. And this is a pattern of trouser which was conceived of in the Second World War and then was manufactured in large numbers after the war as the British 1950 pattern, but also manufactured in Commonwealth countries to their own slightly modified patterns, and the Royal Navy used a version of this waist fastening on one of their number 8 action working dress trouser patterns as well. So we're going to have a look at some of the varieties of this in the video, and without further ado we'll get into the main part of the video now and have a look at these different patterns of trousers compared. So the selection of trousers we're going to have a look at here are from top to bottom: British 1950 pattern in jungle green, British 1950 pattern in khaki, British Royal Navy issue action working dress trousers, the number 8 uniform, the standard Royal Navy working dress, Australian and New Zealand crossover belt trousers. And the idea of this is to look at the development of the waist fastening as opposed to looking at the trousers in depth. These are things which will be covered in a separate video in the future. This is just to look at some of the different variations of this. One thing that's missing from this really is a pair of the DPM windproof trousers, which also use this waist fastening. Don't actually have a pair of those as of yet, but they'll be talked about separately if I do end up picking up a pair at some point in the future. So what we'll do now is we'll split these off and we'll have a look at them in sequence. So the first pair we're looking at here are the British 1950 pattern, which are I suppose the first pair that sort of introduced this on a mass-produced scale, and they are certainly the progenitor of the patterns which followed, which we're going to look at. So we have, the way this works basically, you have buckles on each side, as you can see there. If I unbuckle the straps here, you can see we have one which passes through a hole in the waistband there, and the other one just loops over the front. So you end up with a waistband which can be adjusted evenly on each side, and the trousers are obviously self-supporting. Later, of course, a much simpler way of doing this was to add side adjusters on each side, and you just pinch the trouser in at each side. Standard British Second World War era jungle clothing had just had two small straps at the front which pinched the waist in at the front as it was adjusted. So this is superior to that, I would say, but certainly having the side adjusters on each hip, it's a better way of doing things. This is a bit of a faff, and was certainly viewed as such by troops who used it. I've seen quite a few comments on that. These had a very long service life, though they would gain a different name later on in service. The nomenclature would change. As you can see from the label here, these are referred to as trousers drill SCC15 green, which is the colour code for these, and then 1950 pattern, and these are manufactured by Aquarock, as you can see. This is a label from a later pattern of trousers, exactly the same pattern, manufactured in exactly the same pattern, slight change in colour, and they're referred to as trouser men's olive drab, and then obviously you have the NATO stock number, and these have a 1970s contract number down below, so still manufactured into the 1970s. So here we have exactly the same pattern of trousers, the 1950 pattern, but in khaki rather than green. The British Army in the 1950s essentially standardised on a bush jacket and this pattern of trousers made in both green and khaki for use in hot weather environments, be it jungle, be it arid. So that was essentially how they standardised, and you obviously again have the double buckle, the crossover belt waist fastening there, exactly the same pattern, same layout of pockets and so forth as well. We'll take a look at the label now, and you can see rather than having the SCC green code here, we simply have trousers drill khaki 1950 pattern, and then the size information down below. The next pair to look at are of course the Royal Navy issue number 8 action working dress trousers. Now these were introduced in the 1950s. Previous action working dress trousers, previous patterns had used the double buckle at the front of the waist here, similar to tropical clothing. The buckles used in this instance are the same size and everything, so they've literally just moved the buckles from here to the sides. They've not introduced a new pattern of buckle, and then they're just a friction fit with a very thin crossover strap, so it works in exactly the same manner, just you don't have a tongue buckle at the side. You can see the buckles are removable with a button there, which is typical, and then crosses over in the same way with a little slot there on one side, and on the other side it just loops over and attaches at the side there, as you can see. So it's exactly the same principle, just adapted for naval clothing. Now why the Royal Navy thought this was necessary, I don't know. Obviously later on they would change to having side adjusters, but these were introduced in the 1950s, and they still turn up in photographs from the 1970s, though quite washed out by that point. These are still made of cotton. They're of course replaced by the infamous polycotton, high percentage polyester number 8 action working dress, which got such a bad reputation during the Falklands War because it wasn't fire retardant. But these are still seen worn into the 70s. As I say, I do have photographs. I've seen photographs of these still in use, though very faded by that point, as I say. They're quite a simple design. We do have belt loops, which is a difference from the army trousers. Button fly, hip pockets here, as you can see, and then at the rear we have a single rear pocket, as you can see, which is just a button through opening there with a pocket sewn inside. So very simple design, no leg pockets or anything. There is a label in these which is quite washed out, and in typical Royal Navy fashion it doesn't provide a great deal of information, but we will have a look at that now. And of all places, this label is located in the very bottom of the left trouser leg seam, and as you can see it does say size 5 at the top there, and then would give some further sizing information. You can just about make out the manufacturer. There's no real details about what these are. The Navy tended to go by vocab number if anything. And then at the bottom you can just make out the date of 1952. So we're moving on to Commonwealth produced trousers now, and these are Australian greens, crossover belt trousers from their greens uniform. Not entirely sure when these were introduced. Certainly for a long time Australia manufactured trousers with the 2 small buckles at the front and straps adjusting at the front of the waistband. When they changed over to the crossover belt we see here, I'm not entirely sure. Certainly they were in production in the early 1960s. They deviate slightly from the British pattern, but not massively. They still have the map pocket down on the leg here. You can just see that in shot here. See the button flap for that on the leg here. So that's in common with 1950 pattern. You still have the 2 rear pockets there, as you can see. But you have the addition of belt loops, which you can see there. So 2 at the front, 2 at the rear. The crossover belt design is essentially exactly the same. It's just hidden by the belt loop here, but you do have the slot in the waistband there, as you can see. The side pockets are essentially the same pattern as 1950 pattern. The major change is the addition of belt loops. So from that point of view, almost a direct copy of British practice, but with the addition of belt loops, which does mean that certainly on this side where the strap that goes around just rides across the waistband, this does have the added effect of retaining that in place rather than it sliding off the top of the waistband, which can happen with the 1950 pattern trousers. So certainly from the actual crossover belt design of waist fastening, this is an advantage, having something here to hold that strap in place. So they're Australian made trousers. We'll just get a close-up shot of the label now. You can see here these particular examples dated 1968. We have the NATO stock number underneath the size details there. These are pretty much unworn, so there's no writing on this, which is quite nice. But that's a close-up of the label of these trousers. The final pattern we'll look at here are the New Zealand made greens, the New Zealand made crossover belt trousers. You can see again, very similar to the 1950 pattern, we do have the map pocket down on the leg here, as you can see. We turn this over, you do have 1 rear pocket instead of 2, so that's a change as well. These do have belt loops, but the layout is different from the Australian made trousers. As we don't have a belt loop at the front here, the New Zealand has added a little loop specifically for the belt that crosses over there to keep it in place, which is a good idea. Nice addition to the design. You'll also note that the holes on the crossover belts are quite closely spaced, which means you've got slightly finer adjustment for the waistband, which is again a nice feature. You can see we have button belt loops on each hip here, and then 1 in the centre at the rear, so only 3 belt loops rather than 4 as on the Australian trousers. Otherwise very similar to the 1950 pattern, as I say, deleted 1 rear pocket, added belt loops. That's basically the differences. This little loop here, slightly differently spaced eyelets or adjustment holes on the crossover belt at the trousers. The hip pockets here are basically the same design, still have pleats and so forth. So otherwise the design obviously derived from the 1950 pattern, or possibly even derived from the Australian copy thereof. But these are the New Zealand made examples, and we'll have a look at the details of the label now. As you can see, as is typical for New Zealand clothing and indeed equipment, you have Defence Property in big bold letters at the top there, and then these made by Tracy Manufacturing, Cambridge Limited, dated 1974, and then simply provided with a size number as opposed to further sizing details. So that's the label of these trousers. So there we are. I hope you found it interesting looking at those. As I say, these will be covered in more detail in future videos, looking at them in their own right. if they haven't been already. Some of them already have been. If you check on my channel, have a look around, you'll find that some of these patterns of uniform have already been looked at in more detail. So the idea of this was just to compare and look at how this waist fastening sort of influenced different countries' trouser designs, tropical uniform designs, and so forth. If you found this interesting and you'd like to see more from the channel, please do consider subscribing if you haven't already. And whether you're newly subscribing or you've previously subscribed, please do make sure you hit the little bell, the little notification button down below, which will of course alert you when I upload future videos. If you really like my uploads and you would like to support the channel, you can. Both Patreon and PayPal are linked down below. And a massive thank you, as ever, to everybody who supports the channel using those methods. It's greatly appreciated, as I always say. If you'd like to follow the channel on social media, you can. Facebook, Instagram and Twitter are all linked down below as well. And if you'd like to get in contact but you don't really use social media, there is of course an email address down there as well. That's everything for this video. So until next time, bye for now.